Hello and welcome to Common Ground, an inside look at Suffolk County. I'm your host, Sheriff Steve Tompkins. Now, today's guest is like an extraordinary, I like to say public advocate more than public servant. I've got a little trouble with the word servant, but when you're in public life, that is the job. You are there, you are hired by the public to effectuate the things that they need to get done. And so today we have a gentleman that has been doing this for, low I say, 25, maybe 30 years and has done a great job. And that would be our United States Congressman, Michael Capuano. Sir, thank you so much for being here today.
Pleasure to be here.
Really excited to have you here. Let's first and foremost, give the folks a little background as to who you are. How did you actually get into public service? Where did you start?
I got into public service as a local guy. I was involved with community housing, with affordable housing. And then I had kids, and honestly, before kids, it was a whole different world. I mean, once you have kids, you start, for instance, I started bringing them to the same playgrounds I played on when I was a kid. But as an adult, I realized that all those playgrounds had broken glass. Every one of them had broken swings. Every one of them had broken basketball hoops. And I hadn't really realized that as a child that we had that, but you kind of just accepted because that's what it was. As an adult, I got angry about it. And I realized that by the adult, you've got a little broader perspective and you realize not everybody lives like this and we don't have to accept it. So I got involved in politics. I mean, that's a kind of a short way to say it, but it's true. And honestly, I ran for a local alderman, city councilor, and at a later time I ran for mayor and I won. And when I became mayor, the first thing I did was rebuild the playgrounds for that very reason. And then we did a lot more than that, planted tens of thousands of trees, all kinds of stuff. And I still live in Somerville. Then I was mayor, Joe Kennedy, who held this seat, decided to retire. And I looked at it and I said, you know what? A lot of the problems that we have emanate from Washington. And a lot of the money that we spend emanates from Washington. And I thought, maybe they need a street kid like me down there to kind of straighten it all out.
Yeah.
So I took a shot, got lucky, won, and I've been doing that ever since.
Talk to us real quickly about the process of actually campaigning to, when you run for office. I mean, particularly some of the where you started, you're on the front lines.
Yeah.
And people are going to really tell you how they feel about this or that. What did you think about the whole process of campaigning and actually putting yourself out there?
I actually like it, and I mean, it can be difficult. I want people to tell me the truth, and some people don't like what you've done or whatever you believe in. They'll tell you, and that's fine. I'm very respectful of people who I disagree with until they are not respectful of me. Then I usually straighten them out, not on issues, but it's like, look, we can disagree without being jerks. Right. But I like it. I mean, we just started, I've been doing this now for a while, but the weather hasn't been cooperating. And that last weekend was the first weekend that we had decent weather for a long time. And we went out and we started knocking doors. I really had a good time. You get to talk to people one-on-one, you get to ask their opinion, you get to talk to them for a few minutes and see what's on their mind and kind of get a better feeling. In public life, some people would love to tell you, oh, you're the greatest guy in the entire world. And that's wonderful, but, thank you very much. I want to know what real people think of me.
Yeah.
So I actually like it. I think it's an opportunity to kind of sharpen my own skills, sharpen my message, and to reconnect. So I'm kind of happy to be out there again.
So now let's juxtapose that to working in D.C. And you talk about, I know, right? And you talk about this kind of partisan divide where you're working with your colleagues to try to really do what the folk have hired you to do, but it's like this, it's disconnected, it's disjointed. People just can't seem to get together.
What people don't understand is it's a huge country with a lot of different opinions. And when you have a serious difference of opinion on important issues, you're going to fight about them. That doesn't mean we hate each other. I know the TV likes to put it out there, we hate each other, and it's all about Democrats versus Republicans. It's not. I'm a Democrat because I hold certain general philosophical values, but I fight with some Democrats on occasion too. But I'll give you an example, the role you're in. We argue about what is appropriate criminal justice. We argue for a very simple thing. When somebody goes to jail, should you just throw them in, lock the key, and run away, or should you try to rehabilitate them and make them a better person? I believe we should try to rehabilitate them. Others believe just throw them away, lock the key, and run away. Of course we're going to argue about that. I think it's an important aspect. You're impacting lots of people's lives, and you can't just sit silent if you have strong opinion. That's just one example. Housing, education, on and on and on. Do you believe that we are all in this together and should try to share some of the responsibility with making sure that everybody's child gets a fair shot at education, that no seniors go homeless, and on and on and on. And when you get into those issues, of course you're going to argue, and you should. And that argument is, yes, it's between the individuals, but it's also between Americans, trying to figure out how many Americans really believe in affordable housing, how many Americans really believe in rehabilitation for prisoners. And that's what it is. It's an ongoing battle about what kind of society we want to live in. And it's messy, it is argumentative, but it's also essential.
So I want to go back to housing in a moment, but first I want to ask you about this. So back in the day, my understanding is legislators, whether it's in the State House in Boston or down in D.C., could get together, probably after hours, smoke a cigar, and have a conversation, maybe over a drink, and talk about how you can get things done. But it doesn't feel like it's happening the way it used to.
It probably isn't, because the world is faster now. We all have cell phones, we all have computers, we all, all that kind of stuff. There's 24-hour news stations. Right. Everybody has a camera on their phone, so if you're having a drink with somebody snaps a photo, next thing you know, the Twitter world thinks you're drunk, and so the world has changed an awful lot, and it will continue to change, but the concept is still there. People do talk to each other. It is not always along the line of partisan divide. It is not even along philosophical divide. I have very good friends with whom I disagree with, but we enjoy each other's company. And so it's there more than TV would like you to believe, because stop and think about it. Most news programs today, with the 24-hour cycle, they're there on the air all day long. They got to fill that slot, and they got to sell ads. How do they do that? They don't sell it with a conversation like this. I don't mean to be rude. The two of us having this conversation isn't going to sell a lot of ads. So I have to call you a name, you have to call me a name, and all of a sudden, oh, look, they called each other names, and somebody will buy an ad saying, oh, because you're watching us call each other names, I'll buy an ad in your show. And then America walks away thinking that we hate each other. Now, again, there are deep, strong philosophical differences of opinion on important issues. These are not small issues. And you add that to the flavor that you don't see people like me on a lot of these talk shows, because I won't do what they want me to do, which is call other people's names and belittle them and demean them. I'm happy to argue with them, but not in that capacity.
Well, now I'm going to throw you a curveball, because I want to ask you about the Republican Party and our president now. And it just appears to, like you say, on this side of the television screen, that the Republican Party is allowing certain things to go along the way that most of the country is not in favor of, and they just won't stop it or speak up against it. What's going on there?
That's a very good question, and I can't answer you. I don't know. There has to be a line. People forget that when Richard Nixon got impeached, a lot of Republicans voted to impeach him because they rose above party politics. We're not there yet with Trump. There aren't enough Republicans who are willing to distance themselves from him in a public way. If this continues, I think that will happen. I don't know that, but we'll find out. But you have to, in politics, every politician likes to get up and says, I did this and I did that. The truth is, nobody does anything alone. You have to work with other people. You have to be cooperative. You have to be part of a team. So there is some hesitation to beat up your own captain of your own team. Democrats had it with Obama. Democrats had it with Clinton. It doesn't mean we won't do it. It just means when I disagreed with President Obama, I was maybe a little bit more respectful than I would otherwise be with President Trump. Why? Because he's the captain of my team. And it doesn't mean I didn't disagree with him. It just means those disagreements are, Mr. President, look, I don't agree with what you're doing on this, as opposed to getting up and say, you no good, SOB, you're doing these things. And then they're doing the same thing. But at some point, for instance, I sued President Obama. I was one of the people who sued him when he shot missiles into Libya, for the same exact reason that I think that President Trump should not be shooting missiles into Syria without congressional approval. If Congress approves it, so be it. But I don't think that any president, any human being, should be able to bring this country to war without the approval of the United States Congress. So I've had my disagreements with both, and most of us can do that. But I did give President Obama maybe a little bit more leeway than I would have if he had been a Republican. It wouldn't have been the same. He was not the polar opposite of Trump. Trump is a whole new thing. That he seems to go out of his way to, not just the philosophical differences, he seems to go out of his way to poke people in the eye, call them names, belittle them, and any human being has that natural reaction. I mean, again, once you start out, we do disagree. Now you're calling me a name.
Taking it to a whole nother level now.
Well, it's not a good level.
Right. Should we be optimistic, we meaning the country, around the discussions that's going on between North and South Korea right now?
I hope so. I mean, it would be great to have a little sanity in the world for a change. North Korea is obviously a tinderbox. We have a lot of living veterans who fought and many who died there. And so this is not ancient history. And we have a very difficult regime in the North who hates the regime in the South. And nuclear weapons in the hands of a country like that are a real problem. So optimism, I think, is always called for. I actually believe that any politician in any capacity has to be the quintessential optimist. You have to believe it's going to be better tomorrow. You have to believe I can help make it better. It may not happen, but the answer is, am I optimistic? Yes, I am. Do I think it's going to happen? I don't know. We'll find out, but I hope so. We're going to do what we can to make it better.
Well, the reason I ask about the optimism this time around, because I believe years ago we were down the same road with North and South Korea when they did the huggy, kissy, holding hand things, and it fell apart.
And it could again. Who knows? I mean, I don't believe. I'm not ready to say it, but I haven't been happy with the way President Trump has done this. Calling the North Korean leader by various names. Look, I don't have a whole lot of regard for him. From what I know of him, he's not a very good person. But I don't think you make friends or get somebody to do what they want by calling them a name. Rocket Man. It's just insulting. It's childish. It's unnecessary. I mean, it's the United States of America. We're the most powerful country in the history of mankind. They know we can take them on if we wanted to. There's no doubt about that. You don't have to call somebody a name when if Mike Tyson walked in here, he doesn't have to call me a name for me to know he can beat me up. It's like so it's demeaning. It's unnecessary. So all that being said, I'm still optimistic about it. I'm hoping that the leader of North Korea has come to realize that it's worth something to his country to get closer to a peaceful resolution of these problems.
So bringing it back home, before we went on air, you and I were briefly talking about the homelessness situation that's running rampant throughout the country. And clearly there are a lot of people that are in a homeless situation that are suffering from substance abuse. Unfortunately, a lot of people that have mental illness. Yep. Is there a way to really wrap our arms around this situation so that we can really address it in a holistic way that's going to produce positive results?
I think there is, but it's difficult to do. First of all, it's going to cost money. It's going to cost money to provide the health care that these people need. It's going to cost money to provide them the housing that they deserve. As a human being, I think they deserve it. So that it is going to cost some money. I don't think it's the most expensive thing in the world, and I personally think it's worth the money. Because I agree with you, not all, but I'd say the significant majority of current people who are homeless in most of the country are there because of alcohol, drugs, or mental illness. Not all, but many of them are. And if you're going to, some of these people, we're going to have a honest discussion about whether society puts itself back in a position of saying, Steve, we love you, you have a problem, you have no choice but to come get this treatment. That's a very difficult conversation to have, and it's got to be done because it's been done so poorly in the past. Right. But we can't, there's nothing else you can do unless you're willing to have the state government, impose some degree of limitations to say you must come get this treatment, and then treat them with humanity. Now, the past, when they've done that, they just threw them in a locked room and that was the end of it. That's not the answer. We're not going to go back to those days, I hope. That's not what I want. It has to be, and it's a very, very difficult conversation to have with good people because we've had so many bad experiences with them.
So in the time that I have left with you, I want to hit on a couple of topics and just get, kind of a succinct answer so that it doesn't take a long time, but I want to just touch on several of them. Let's start with wage equity. Now, there's this discussion that if men and women, mom and dad, are making the same amount of money in a household, that household would be a lot stronger and there would be more money put back into the economy. That seems like a very cogent, sensible objective to me, but there's this problem with getting wage equity. What is the problem, to your understanding?
You mean if depends on the word equity. If the word equity means that everybody should be paid the same, that's not going to happen because there should be some reward for better education, for more important work. If it's wage equity in the same, if you're doing the same job, you should be paid the same wage.
Right.
We're getting closer when it comes to women, less so with African Americans and even less so with Latinos. Right. But we're getting closer. And honestly, it's just something we need to continue to struggle with. One of the things I've been trying to do is to require certain corporations to report their wages on the basis of these various, on gender, on race, and ethnicity. Not because I think most of them are intentionally doing anything. I think there's some, but I don't think the average person say, oh, he is a black guy, let's pay him less. But I just think it's the way it is, and they don't think of it until they hold a mirror up to them and say, hey, do you know you're doing this? And I think I'd like to believe that most good people would say, geez, I hadn't realized that. Now I'll take care of it. But you can't get there unless you get the reporting. And right now, the Republican Congress just stopped corporations. We were on the verge of getting corporations to be required to do this. They just stopped it. Actually, the Trump administration, it was an administrative decision. It wasn't even congressional action. And for me, I find that offensive. We all know there's wage equity. We all know it. And the question is, you can pass all the laws in the world unless you find a way to enforce them. And again, there are some bad people. But I think there's a vast majority of people, are good people who may not realize, ooh, I didn't realize I was paying women different. I'll take care of it. Now, again, there are going to be some that are going to require more action than that, but not everybody. So that, for me, that's what I'd like to do. I'd like to get back to where we were. The Obama administration, one of the last things they did walking out the door was this regulation to require these reportings. And the idea was to let's get the facts and let's, when they're real people, real wages, and then we can deal with it. Well, because it was so late in the administration, the Trump administration has been able to undermine it and stop it.
Do you think there should be a $15 an hour minimum wage?
Yeah, I do. I've always thought that. I mean, I think the minimum wage should go up on a regular basis, to be honest. And again, it's not so much about the minimum wage, but when you raise the minimum wage, you usually raise wages for everybody up the ladder. Because somebody who's making $15, they're going to say, hey, wait a minute, what about me? They're going to get 16, or whatever the number is. It's going to go up the ladder. And that's the way you build the middle class, is you take money and you spread it around. And again, there are going to be people who make minimum wage, whatever it is, and there's going to be people who make more than that. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're a trained plumber versus an untrained plumber, you should make more. Now, how much more? That's a fair question. But there's nothing wrong with that. So you're not going to get, that's what I said earlier, wage equity, everybody gets the same. But first of all, everybody deserves a minimum level of living. And that includes, rent and food and all the other things you got to do. And that requires a higher wage. Even at $15 an hour in Boston, that's still the poverty level in Boston.
Tough.
No matter how you measure it, it's going to be hard to make ends meet.
Gun reform, where do you stand on that?
Long time advocate. This is easy. Massachusetts has some of the best laws in the country, and we have some of the lowest crime rates in the country, especially when it comes to gun violence. It doesn't mean we're there yet. We have more to do here as well. But it's proof positive you can live in a safe country without having your own gun. I'm not opposed to having people having guns, but I think everyone should have background checks. I think people with mental illness maybe should be denied an opportunity to have a weapon until they get straightened out. So I think most of these things are easy. Now, for me, I would ban assault weapons, but I also don't think that's going to happen in Congress. Now, if a state does it, that's great, but that's not going to really solve some of the problems because you can get one in New Hampshire. But my argument is, I'm not against guns at all, not at all. I think personal weapons are fine, but there's nothing wrong with reasonable regulation of them as well. And I think Massachusetts is a classic example of it. We're a living example, and I think even we can tighten up our act. And I think we're on the verge of doing that, actually, on one aspect. There's more we can do.
So, I often talk to people about civics and the kind of lack of civics in a lot of our public schools. I say that to lead into what happened with the kids in Parkland, Florida. And when you talk about how they've risen up to talk about sensible gun reform, I think that's a real astute civics lesson, while at the same time talking about gun reform. What do you think about our youth, like back in the civil rights age, that have just risen up to attack this issue?
I couldn't agree more. But one of the things they learned, if you remember, one of the first things they did from Parkland, Florida, is they marched up to Tallahassee, the capital. On the march, by the time they got there, the legislators who were pro-gun, for the lack of a better word, they left town. So the kids, by the time they got to Tallahassee, the people they really needed to talk to were gone.
I didn't know that.
That is also a civics lesson. So honestly, what they should have done is they should have timed their march a little better, or they should have marched to their houses. You can run, but you can't hide. Again, it's not a bad thing. I couldn't agree with you more. I think civics is not taught enough. I think the average person doesn't know what a city councilor, what a congressman, what a legislator, what they really do. Nobody has to become an expert. But since I believe voting is the key to improving this society, I really think people have to understand better what the people they are voting for or voting against, what they do and what they can do.
Years ago, when you talk about politics, we were able to get say, the interstate transportation system up and running, good buses, good trains. It appears now when we talk about transportation and really putting money into that area, it's this tug of war to get that done. Why is that the case?
For a long time, this country believed that there was a societal benefit to transportation, to education, to housing. They built veterans housing. They opened public education in a real sense of the word. And they built interstate highway system. They expanded subway systems. The last 30 years, little by little, people saying, wait a minute, I don't want to do that anymore. It's all about me. I don't want to participate. It's about me. And so when you do that and you say, I want nothing but tax cuts, there's nothing left to do. I mean, so that we've had tax cut to tax cut to tax cut, which again, nobody likes paying taxes, but I don't know how you pay for a transportation system or an education system or a public safety system without the money. And money in government always comes from taxes. Your job. We used to try to rehabilitate more prisons than we do today. I know you're struggling mightily trying to reinstitute a lot of these programs, but you know as better than I do that we don't spend as much as we need to spend to really accomplish the job. And you are the best sheriff I know, and you're doing a great job. But if I also said, you know what, I actually really believe that you can rehabilitate things. Here's some more money for small programs. You know better than I do how much more work you could do with it, how good it would be, and what a great investment it would be. Because now these guys could come out and actually have a skill, maybe not go back, not have the problems that they have. And yeah, it's good for them. And you're not going to succeed on 100% of them, but you're going to succeed on 60, 70% of them. And they're going to become productive members of society, and everybody is going to benefit from it. It's a good investment. People don't necessarily believe so much all this stuff anymore.
But you know what, I'll tell you what, if that were to come to pass, I would actually talk about taking some of that money to get in front of the curve.
I agree.
Before kids fall into the criminal justice system, and really talk to them about the ills. This thing that you see in movies, and this is not summer camp when you go to jail, but they've got this glorified kind of thing about, I'm going to go and hang out with my buddies. No. You lose your liberty. Somebody else like me is telling you when you can do whatever it is that you want to do. So I really look at trying to focus really on elementary and middle school. Frankly,
I couldn't agree. Do you remember the debate we had years ago, before I was in Congress, on they started programs on midnight basketball? Oh, it's a terrible giveaway. I was one of those kids. And guess what? If you weren't opening the basketball courts, we were breaking in. Not me, of course.
Yeah, of course.
They were, and not doing anything, just to play ball. Right. Because there were no lights in the courts, and plus if you would bounce the ball in the schoolyard, the neighbor would yell. So you wanted to be inside to keep the noise down and to actually have some. What's wrong with that program? Because the alternative is you can't go in, you got nothing to do at night, and now your opportunities are, your choices may be less wise. And I thought it was a good program. Yet, if you remember, some people went nuts thinking it was some kind of a giveaway to the inner city youth, and that wasn't the beginning, but I thought that attitude is still around. God forbid we do anything to to provide them choices, to provide them the realistic opportunity to make thoughtful choices. If you do this, here's your consequences. And by the way, you have an opportunity to do something else. We'll train you. We'll let you play hoop in the middle of the night. We'll help you do all these things to help you make better choices in life. It's a struggle in Washington because so many people have moved away. Again, it's us versus me. I belong in the us category.
So we're just about out of time. I just have to ask you this last question. Now you have a race, you have an opponent coming up this year. Just tell us briefly why the electorate should keep Mike Capuano down in D.C. versus bringing in someone new.
Quite simply because there's nobody better equipped and better to handle the Trump administration. I've been fighting it now for 2 years pretty successfully. There's nobody with a record of accomplishment that I've had, bringing money back to the district, bringing jobs back to the district, bringing housing back to the district. There's nobody who better represents. I have an incredibly diverse district. I have a majority of nobody, not a majority of whites or blacks or Hispanics. Everybody in my district is not a majority, and that's a good thing. I like it that way. And I have a good record, I believe, across the board of representing everybody equally and fighting for what we all believe in. So for me, that's really what it's all about. And for anybody who wants to challenge that, they're welcome to. But I think they have an obligation to prove why they can do something better. And my record's out there. I mean, housing and transportation and equal rights and human rights and international war and peace. The record's pretty long and pretty deep. I feel pretty proud of it, and to be honest with you, I think the average voter is going to see that change is good when it's appropriate, but you have to have a reason for change. Change just to change, interesting, but, and by the way, there's another little thing in Washington called seniority that matters. Like in a union, like any place else, seniority matters. You have more influence, more impact, and if the Democrats take the House back, the seniority that I've built up over the years I've been there is going to be very beneficial to this district and to this state in a very direct and substantive and measurable way.
Congressman, I want to thank you for coming on today. I know you've got the crazy schedule, you're all over the place.
Thanks, Steve.
But sitting with us for the the last couple of minutes and just talking about these issues that are very important to our constituencies is crucial.
Thank you.
Timely. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate
Always
it.
a pleasure, Steve. Thank you.
All right, folks, we are going to go to a break, and so I do ask you that if you've got to run to go get your soda pop and popcorn, do it quickly because we will be right back. Please stay tuned.
Bye-bye.
Hi. Hoping for a crisp breeze to help keep you alert. Oh, he took a sip of water too. That'll probably help. You were probably gonna turn down the radio too, so you could focus, right?
Probably okay isn't okay.
Right.
If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend.
I think the water line is what really drove it home. I blew on him.
Hello and welcome to Common Ground, an inside look at Suffolk County. I'm your host, Suffolk County Sheriff Steve Tompkins. Now, as you all know, we're in a crazy political season, and crazy is your definition for whether it's crazy good, crazy bad, or crazy complacent. That said, we have some national campaigns that are really thriving, and we've got some local campaigns that's really thriving. And on the home front, our guest today is City Councilor Ayanna Pressley, who is a rock star. And a lot of people like her. A lot of people like what she's trying to get accomplished. They like her message. And so she's here today to talk to us about how she would effectuate the job as congressperson if she were to win in this upcoming election. So without any further ado, Ayanna?
Hey.
Thank you so much.
Listen, that was a great lead-in. No cue cards?
Really?
Come on now, putting that degree to work.
This is what I do. Come on now, stop playing. Stop. So Ayanna and I go way back, as you can tell, and so there's a shorthand here.
Yeah.
But to that end, talk to me about the shorthand between yourself and the constituents that you want to serve. You've been all throughout the district talking to people for quite some time.
Yeah.
What are you hearing from them?
Well, first I'm hearing that the challenges that I've been working to address here in Boston as an at-large Boston City Councilor for the last 8 years are regional challenges. So these are really transcendent challenges and the issues that I've dedicated my life to addressing economic inequality, the wealth and wage gap, structural racism, gun violence, really disparities and inequities that are only worsening and being further exacerbated under this current administration. And that's why I'm running. I mean, the truth be told, what is happening right now is really just evidence of a deficit of empathy, zero compassion. This president is rolling out every day bigoted, draconian, cruel, impulsive, and short-sighted policies. But these inequities and disparities in the 7th Congressional District, so far as transit equity, environmental justice, feeling safe in community, the opportunity to build wealth, access to fresh and healthy food, or access to a highly performing school, these issues existed before Trump. They're being worsened under Trump, but these issues existed before Trump. And so I'm running for the 7th Congressional District because this is the most diverse district, and yet it is the most unequal. And I'm proven in my time on the Boston City Council through nuanced, holistic policymaking and taking on some really complex social issues. And the most important thing, and what I think these times require really right now, is doing that work in partnership with community. That's what folks are looking for, is a leader that's going to be a partner.
So we only have a limited amount of time with you, so I'm going to hit a number of subject areas.
Let's do it.
And here, have the viewers hear how you come down on. Let's start with education.
Yes.
Talk to us about the education system, not just in the Commonwealth, but nationally, and particularly as it pertains to the gap between kids of color and kids of the so-called majority population throughout the country.
Okay, I'll try to hit 3 points very quickly. So, first it begins with early education and care. We've got a lot of work to do to make that affordable to ensure that it is accessible. And by accessible, I don't just mean by geography, I mean to every worker. For example, one of the issues I'm looking at right now is people in non-traditional, non-standard jobs like healthcare, hospitality, the trades. They don't have access to childcare because most childcare is only 9 to 5, right? So with early education and care, this is the foundation which determines everything else. A lot of the disparate outcomes I'm looking to disrupt and to address could have been avoided were it for that foundation of early education and care. Massachusetts is number 2 in the country when it comes to child care costs, almost $17,000 per child. So, so for me, it begins there, ensuring that child care is accessible, that it is quality, that it is affordable, that we are also considering that workforce and making sure that they're working at a living wage and have good benefits. And then when it comes to elementary and high school, for me, all student outcomes begin with student health and wellness. And right now, trauma is a barrier to learning. The trauma of food insecurity, of poverty, fear of deportation, displacement, experiencing being exposed to violence. So what I'll be championing on the federal level is what I've done on the local level, and that is an investment in trauma-sensitive and informed schools. Social workers, school nurses, and guidance counselors. And then in terms of higher ed, the federal government needs to make a greater investment in higher education so that we're not having, schools that are in competition and then students are bearing the burden of that because, schools are competing for who has the best facilities. Those dollars aren't getting into the classroom. And then we need debt-free higher education. The average graduate is leaving school with $30,000 worth of debt, which is an incredible burden and impacting their ability to make their full contribution.
So Mayor Walz and other electeds across the country are talking about tuition-free, particularly community colleges. Is that realistic? Is that sustainable? And how does that happen? How do you have tuition-free higher education?
Well, I support debt-free higher education, and there's a lot of different ways that we can get at that. But I also want to say that it's important that, how I approach these issues is with the intersectionality of them. So even if school is, higher education is debt-free, the reality is that most people in higher education right now are adults, and they are people with children. Even young adults with children. So there's food insecurity at college. We need more of our schools to have childcare. So there's a totality and a confluence of issues that need to be addressed. It's not just that school is debt-free, but that we're also addressing these other avenues that have been proven barriers to people finishing their education, and then in turn being more competitive in the job market and being on path to economic mobility and freedom. So I do support debt-free education, and I think in the meantime, for those that are already in school and that do have debt, we should be looking at income eligibility, repayment programs, refinancing, and then I think for students that are working in the nonprofit or public sector, they should have loan forgiveness.
Talk to me about vocational education and how important that is, because a lot of kids either can't go to college, can't afford to go to college, or really don't want to go to college, but clearly they need to have a vocation that's going to take care of them as they get older. What do you think of vocational education?
Yeah, well, it is critically important, and we have a lot of work here to do within the 7th Congressional District, specifically in Madison and Boston, to make that the premier Voc Tech school that it needs to be. So some of that is about partnership. I know Cambridge College is doing some creative partnerships with the local high school. I want to see more of that, or maybe we can earmark seats out of these high schools into college and or into these trades where people would be earmarking and holding seats. I've been focused on all of the trades, not just construction and building, but culinary arts, healthcare, our nursing programs.
When you say focused on, what do you mean? To try to get them to
I've been focused
bring in more people?
Yes, I've been focused on developing intentional partnerships that would strengthen pipelines into those industries, because these are some of the largest industries and the most reliable in Massachusetts. And so certainly on the federal level, that's what I would be focused on, not only a greater investment, but also just bearing in mind that votes happen on the floor of Congress, but the work happens here in the district, in partnership with stakeholders at every level. This is a show called Common Ground. Well, we have to find it.
Talk to me about the elimination of the school to prison pipeline to be replaced with what I would call the cradle to career pipeline. How would you work to eliminate the school to prison pipeline?
Well, I would just scale up the work that I've already been doing on the local level. What I've been doing is working with Boston area schools and with students, because everything that I do, I want to do it cooperatively. I believe that the solutions exist by working with the communities that are the most impacted by an issue. So when I saw that we were seeing an increase in discipline, suspension, expulsion, and it was disproportionate, that Black and brown students, boys and girls, were receiving punitive measures in contrast to their white peers, 8 to 11 times that. I said, okay, let me meet with the students. And so I partnered with Monique Morris of the National Black Women's Justice Institute, who authored the book Push Out. It's about the criminalization of Black girls in our schools. And we did evidence-based research over a period of 3 months. We stipended 100 Black and brown girls as a part of this research to get the feedback directly from them. And we learned there was some low-hanging fruit. So I think that's one way, is to reform code of conduct, dress code, and discipline policies, which on their face appear to be gender and race neutral, but disproportionately are resulting in the push out of Black and brown students. So we need more restorative justice practices in our schools, and we need more trauma sensitive and informed schools, where when a child is acting out or shutting down, an educator has the tools and will look at a student and say, what happened to you, not what's wrong with you.
So you, as a city councilor, created a committee around families, around young women. Talk to us about that. Why did you do it, and how successful have you been at moving that further?
Sure. So I think I have the honor, although the sad commentary, that it took over 100 years of being the first woman of color elected to the Boston City Council. And I do believe in cognitive diversity, a diversity of perspective, opinion, and thought. In order for an issue to be championed, someone has to first see the issue, and that requires a different lens. And so I think I've proven the impact of that. So when I was elected to the council, I created this policy committee. It's the Committee on Healthy Women, Families, and Communities. It works on those issues that disproportionately and adversely impact women and girls: human trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, advocating for more women in police and fire and the trades, and the growth of women-owned small businesses, and then big social determinant issues which are critical to have a healthy community. How do we eradicate poverty? How do we break cycles of violence in all forms, domestic, sexual, youth, street, and gang? And how do we reduce trauma in our communities? This is the first committee in the history of the City Council to name trauma. And to your point, the committee and its work has been studied, and it's been replicated in 3 other cities: Cincinnati, Ohio, Providence, Rhode Island, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
That's great. I mean, that's what you need. This is the kind of work that people are looking to their representatives for. My question is, with all of the dysfunctionality that's going on down in D.C., how do you go down there and start chipping away at what I would call some of the nonsense, the barriers for people to actually cross the aisles, shake hands, and get something done?
Well, I think first, I don't define the work only by how I vote on the floor of Congress. I don't define leadership, and it's easy to do this in a dark blue state, to just make it about years served or how one votes. Ultimately, it's not just about that voting scorecard, it's about impact, and it's about partnership. And so there's work to be done on the floor of Congress, but there's work to be done here in the district as well. And if I'm elected to the 7th Congressional District, I will be that type of representative who is leaning in and partnering. So I'll give a quick example. Puerto Rico is in the dark, and we have failed that country. And I would certainly, lead efforts to see a greater federal investment to get them on a pathway to recovery, and also to call for an investigation into why we so woefully and egregiously failed them. But meanwhile, there are 4,000 evacuees in the 7th Congressional District that were displaced because of Hurricane Maria, who need transitional housing, who need job and workforce development and placement, who need for their kids to get the trauma wraparound supports that they deserve, who need for us to pass Safe Communities Act here in the Commonwealth, which we didn't. So I guess the short way to answer your question is that in order for us to change the climate of Washington, this district needs a leader that will lift up the stories and the struggles of the people in this district. We have policies that are informed by zero humanity and empathy because people don't know the stories. I need to lift those stories up. I'm going to invite people to testify before Congress. You know, when you elevate people's consciousness, that ultimately shapes and informs policy making. The last thing I would say is that it's very easy to think that we are powerless because we're in the minority, but I reject that notion. If we want to defeat the hate coming out of that White House, that's about more than a vote and what happens on the floor of Congress. It's about the movement that we need to build, and we have an opportunity to do right now. That is how we resist the hate coming out of that White House, and it's also how we continue to progress forward. So I'm encouraged by what we've seen throughout my candidacy and our campaign. We are building a movement. We are building a coalition. We are effectively and successfully engaging super voters, infrequent voters, new voters, and that's what we need, because this is a fight for the future of our democracy.
So when you talk about the hate that's coming out of the White House, I want to switch to immigration for a quick minute. The country was sold years ago as having streets paved with gold. Give us your tired, give us your downtrodden, and let people come to this country to help them improve their station in life. If you look at it this way, everybody in this country immigrated from somewhere else, going back to the beginning of this country. How is it that immigrants or children of immigrants are now saying to immigrants or migrants that you can no longer come to this country? Talk to us about how you would address the situation of immigration.
Well, first and foremost, I think that what we're seeing with this zero tolerance policy at the border, which is informed by zero compassion and zero empathy and not making any of us safer. In fact, the dollars that we are spending to prosecute children and families, we are diverting from true national security investments and measures, and we're not focused on drug trafficking and gun trafficking because we're prosecuting children and families. But this is actually the furthering of a long and dark history of brown and black children being ripped from the arms of their families. We saw it during slavery on the auction block. We saw it with indigenous people. And now we're seeing that repeated, which is why I've called for the defunding and the abolishing of ICE. If I thought it was an agency that could be reformed from the inside out, I would support that. But I think it's a watershed moment when we see children being separated from families. And so this was a position that I arrived at over time, the way I do every decision, and that's working closely with the families and those most impacted, immigrant and refugee advocacy coalitions who have been on the front lines of this work, and families. We talk a lot about the border, but there are families who have been fighting to stay together and to feel safe right here in this Commonwealth and in the 7th Congressional District. Here's some of the things I want to support immigrants and refugees. I want to ban the census question that asks immigration status. Immigrants are undercounted, and so in turn are under-resourced, these communities. And so I would like to ban that question from the census asking of immigration status. Secondly, we need to see a greater investment in the expansion of English language learner classes not being privatized. That is hampering people's ability to have language access, to be competitive in the job market, and also to advocate for their kids, you know, within the school system. Furthermore, I want to work with state stakeholders to pass the Safe Communities Act, because immigrants and refugees should be protected and not profiled. And again, I'm going to continue to champion a greater investment in social emotional wellness supports, because so many of our youth are traumatized by the threat of deportation. People can't go about their daily lives. We have parents that aren't taking their kids to health centers to get vaccinated or to get preventative care or medical intervention because they're afraid they'll be picked up, or to pick their kid up from childcare, from school. So we need a Clean Dream Act. We need to stop pawning off the hurt one constituency at a time. We are one human family. Our destinies are tied. I don't want to invest any money in a Trump hate wall. I'm not going to negotiate and barter with the lives of kids. So we need a Clean Dream Act, and we also need to renew and extend TPS, and then provide folks a path to citizenship. Temporary protected status, I mean, that's a joke. Many of these people have lived here 10, 15, 20 years. There's nothing temporary about that. And they've been paying taxes, contributing to our economy, and they need to be on a pathway to permanent citizenship.
So we've only got about 5 minutes left. I want to switch to criminal justice. And I want to ask you about the elimination of mandatory minimum sentences. And I know that I believe you stand for the elimination of that. I'm curious as to whether or not you stand for the elimination of all of it, i.e. murder, arson, and rape. Where do you stand on that? Do you think mandos for that should also be eliminated as the offenses that might be done by a low-level nonviolent offender? Where do you come down on mandatory minimum sentences and the elimination of?
Yeah, well, I definitely think we need sentencing reform, and I do support the eliminating of mandatory minimums.
All of them.
Yes. You know, that's, you know, it's tough, you know, because, you know, I do a lot of work in these other spaces. I'm a survivor, you know, of sexual violence myself. But I do know, because we have an unequal criminal justice system and unequal access to fair representation, that, you know, disproportionately, you know, our communities, Black and brown folks, are incarcerated. And so, you know, for those reasons, until we address these other issues, yes, that's something I support. I also support bail reform. We spoke earlier about restorative justice practices. And then also, you know, as the child of an incarcerated parent, my father was incarcerated off and on for some 14 years. He battled substance abuse disorder, and like so many people, and I thank you for your leadership in this space, he should not have been incarcerated. My father, like so many people, was self-medicating because of a lifetime of trauma, and he needed to be in treatment or a drug court or, you know, something. He didn't need to be incarcerated. And so I know the pain and the destabilization of a loved one who is out of the household because they are incarcerated, and how devastating that is. So I plan on championing, supporting, maintaining familial bonds while loved ones are incarcerated. Also fighting for those investments to support successful family reunification, beginning with CORI-friendly housing. You know, so many of our folks, when they are re-entering, are being released to shelter. They represent 30% of our chronically homeless. So, and I do believe while folks are incarcerated, they should have the right to vote while they are incarcerated, and they should be counted and included in the census.
They can vote if you have a misdemeanor. You can't if you have a felony, and I agree with you. They do need to be counted, because legislators are claiming those bodies anyway. You know, in fact, we recently had the district attorney candidates come behind the walls to talk to inmates
Yes,
to
thank you
get
for your leadership.
Oh, that was really good, and that leads to my next question about the push and pull that we have between the judges and the district attorneys, and who should really have that kind of jurisdiction over sentencing. Should it be DAs or should it be judges, in your estimation?
Oh, wow, you're the expert. What do you think?
Oh, I absolutely think.
I mean, it seems that there's just been a complete turnover. So, yeah, go on, tell me. Now, tell me, what do you think?
I think
because there's
judges.
spin drive, they're coming out too quickly.
I think judges, absolutely. I absolutely think, and a lot of the DAs are good friends of mine, and I've had this spirited conversation with them about that, but I do believe at the end of the day that judges should have that kind of, that authority to mete out sentences, not the district attorneys. But that's just me, you know, so.
Well, we're in the midst of a very spirited debate in that contest right now, so
yeah.
We'll see where we land there.
So I'll tell you what, in the moments that we have left, before you look at the camera to talk to the folk about why they should vote for you, what are the 3 issues that you're really, your hallmark issues that are really of the most importance to you from what you've heard on the streets, and what you're going to really fight for if you get down to D.C.?
Sure. Addressing economic inequality, the wealth and wage gap, and as I said, structural racism in all its forms, and gun violence. I do want to say on criminal justice reform, what I am heartened by is that there is bipartisan support for this issue. I think the motivation might be different. Maybe some folks are more concerned about the economic cost, and you know, I'm focused on the social toll and impact. But either way, it seems that there's finally common ground on the issue of criminal justice reform. So whether we are in the majority or in the minority, since there is bipartisan appetite for real reforms there, I do want to give it up to Senators Booker and Harris. I love the legislation they put forward, the REDEEM Act, which is looking at criminal justice reform both in the macro and the micro. So that is a priority of mine. I'm continuing to fight for reproductive justice and health care access for all, and especially eliminating those barriers that women face. And immigration reform. So criminal justice reform, immigration reform, and healthcare access.
In 30 seconds or less, look into that camera there, please, and tell the voters why they should give you their vote on September 4th.
All right. Well, I hope to earn your vote in the September 4th primary. My name is Ayanna Pressley. I've been an at-large Boston City Councilor for the last 8 years. I'm now a candidate for the Democratic nomination for the 7th Congressional District, which includes Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, Chelsea, Everett, Randolph, and a little bit of Milton. I'm running because these times require bold activist leadership, a leader that will build a movement and that will coalition build and be a convener and extend the hand of partnership. These policies coming out of the White White House are meant to divide us and to make us feel small, but I know that we are mighty and we are powerful, and this is the opportunity for us to usher in a new movement. I'm running because the 7th Congressional District is the most diverse district, and yet it is the most unequal. If you need any evidence of this, get on the #1 bus in Cambridge, Harvard Square, ride it to Dudley Square in Roxbury, and do me a favor, just look out the window, and you will visually see a stark contrast of life experiences, median household income, and life expectancy drop by decades. We need to do something disruptive to address these disparate outcomes and to change the legacy of the 7th Congressional District from being the most diverse and yet the most unequal. I want to be that activist leader, and I want to be your partner in that work.
Listen, Ayanna, I've known you for a long time. I appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you.
I appreciate you
too.
as a human being and a champion for the causes of all of those that you seek to make sure they get what they need to not only strengthen their individual selves, their families, but their community. So thank you so very much for coming on today.
Thank you for the platform.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
All right, folks, so that's Ayanna Pressley. She's running for office. There is so much more that you can learn about her. Go to her website or just pull her name up. And believe me, there will be a downpour of all of the things that she has done over the many years that she has been in office.